Rob's on fire. Thank you. That was awesome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to everyone who's just jumped on with us. Yeah, we're in the forward to the second edition, and I'm supported by Bill Swan tonight. He's gonna do a lot more talking than me tonight. I've had a bit of a day. I've had a bit of a day, but you know what? Just looking at all of your faces, I'm already starting to feel, and with that energy from Rob, I mean, come on, that was just amazing. Thank you. All right, we're in forward to the second edition on Roman numerals page XVII 17. I'll give you some time. And we're going to start at the fourth sentence, second paragraph. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically. Let's just back up a bit. So what we've covered here is Dr. Silkworth, who had seen Bill's miraculous change, and Bill had taken the message to Bob, and they go find alcoholic number 3. So we just did a little preamble on that. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. And this was Bill Dobson, Bill D, and he is always depicted as the man on the bed. In a very, very famous AA picture, you'll have Bill and Bob sitting on chairs at a hospital bed, and the man on the bed, that's Bill D. That's our AA number 3. And he drew his last breath on this planet was sober. He was an attorney from Akron. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. Fun fact, Akron had one meeting a week, every single Wednesday. And it's going to go on to say that New York also followed suit, and they were every Tuesday night at Brooklyn. So we had 2 AA meetings. That was it in the beginning. One on a Wednesday, one on a Tuesday. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker, our beloved Bill W., returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. A small second group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time. Now, I just want to make a note here, highlight like a little sideline note here. Substantial sobriety time here, guys, was 2 years. I mean, that's amazing, right? That was their long timers. That was their old timers. They saw people recover in less than 2 weeks. In less than 2 weeks. And I've seen a lot of, and I've heard a lot of watered down stuff. You know, we're spending a month on a step a month. No, there's words like launched, next, vigorous. 2 weeks these guys were doing the deal, right? I mean, that's, yeah. And behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. A dark world indeed. A new light indeed. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. Their message and unique experience. That's what we got to offer, guys. That's our offering. We have a message and we have our unique experience. And when you couple those, that is the power of one alcoholic talking to another. That's our offering. That's the message of alcohol. That's the offering of Alcoholics Anonymous. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to ask Bill just to chime in. Please.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute him. He's got the pictures of Clarence Snyder in the background, and I was trying to click on it to get the thing to unmute. Good afternoon. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Bill. It's good to be here. And it's always good to be here. You know, I don't remember the exact name, and maybe I should, but it's in the history book. About 6 blocks from where I lived was the first official meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It didn't take place in 1935, where it became an independent entity. And these guys over here, these experts, can give us the exact name, but it happened in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which is where my father grew up. His entire family lived there. They all died there. Well, most of them. Some of us are still alive, this generation. But in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, what happened is Clarence Snyder had a group that met. It's someone who was not an AA, was not an AA member, that opened their house to us. And they broke away from the Oxford group. But what they're referring to was what took place in Akron, Ohio, where these drunks had gotten together. And, you know, Nadia was talking about how the recoveries were very rapid. And even when they referred to the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening in the book, and they tell us almost apologetically that these stories and the experiences described in the beginning of the book, in the first edition particularly, which was our text, we may have given you the impression that these upheavals or these dramatic changes were in emotional upheavals, blah, 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 brought about immediately. That was not our intent. But if you recall, you know, there's a thing they got out now. They do back to the 40s. We used to make a joke about it down in St. Peter's. Yeah, we're going back to the 40s. I said, what's that? Well, they take the steps in 4 different weeks or whatever. And I said, well, if you're not careful, you go back to the 20s. And they said, what were they doing in the 20s? I said, they were drinking. Here's the deal. The reason that there was such powerful and spectacular recoveries is there wasn't BB, DD, CC. They didn't have the whole alphabet, which they do now. They had nowhere to go. Alcoholics of the type that Bill was describing, Bill Dotson, Dr. Bob, these were people that were being turned over to asylums and institutions. They were drinking themselves to death. If you remember Bill's last prognosis that he overheard, the doctor at Townsend Hospital talking to, and that might have been, holy moly, who's our great manufacturer? Silkworth might have been talking to Lois when she said, you're probably going to have Bill committed or turn him over to an undertaker. Bill overheard that and got scared, but he said he kind of welcomed the idea because he couldn't imagine going on in this alcoholic torture. So what happened is these people laid hold of it, like it says, and there is a solution with all the desperation of drowning men. Now what happens is we have little earmark symptoms of alcoholism. They send us to a spin drive for 30 days, cost 18 grand. They give you a big book. And I decide if I'm ever seriously alcoholic, I'll go back there to a better facility with horseback riding and better food. And the fact of the matter is this was at the end of the road. And that's what we have to remember. And it's interesting when you read the story about the third, the real corker, the prospect that they called the hospital, and their first prospect was Bill D. He said, you know, I was once somebody, but I'm not. You fellas are this, I'm a goner now. And then, of course, Bill and Bob laughed because they realized that's the hopeless condition that had to take place for the powerful and spectacular recoveries that were taking place early on. Nowadays, AA is so fixed in place that people coming in deluging us that they were afraid of back then is not going to hurt AA, but it might kill the guy who doesn't know the nature of the condition. Also, it was talked about the name of our fledgling society. My understanding is it was actually a drunk alcoholic who gave them the name. They were going up to the Library of Congress to get the name, and they were going to patent the name a way out, but they found out that there were 10 or 12 other books already pending with that patent, and the James Gang or something else. And there was an alcoholic who hadn't gotten sober yet and say, hey, you anonymous alcoholics. And what happened is that's where the name came from. They grabbed the idea and they ran with it. And because it was anonymous and they were attributing God's handiwork remaining silent behind the scenes, that we could follow that, and that would then become the precept of all of our traditions, which is stated in tradition 12. And it was scary. And like, Nadia's talking about, isn't it great that this wasn't time sensitive? I went back to the first page, and it says that when this book was, let me read it to you, because it says something. When I looked up the word, it says our earliest printing voiced the hope. Why are they using the word voice if it was in written form? And I looked it up, and one of it means to express an opinion or a statement in words, and the other means to say something. But there's another book, and Sandy Beach does a phenomenal job of putting it on one of his talks, putting words to it. But one of the books that I read says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was amongst us, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And what I'm saying is, I believe that this is a manifestation of God's Word being laid out to us. I mean, I'll tell you something else, and it's just my theory, but it works for me. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous was published in 1939. The same year, the Wizard of Oz movie came out. And what I believe is the message, and I believe that if God is everything, he can speak to us in every way, any one of our senses, if we're awake or being awakened or paying attention, that both messages were the same. Most of us were brought up with the same philosophy or dogma that was taught to our parents from generations on, to look for God beyond the clouds. Hopefully you'll get it right. If you get it wrong, you're going to burn for eternity, and that's a long time. That means you're going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And if you get it right, you get to live in paradise. So there's been this duality, this not knowing for sure, seeking this power outside of ourselves. And for the alcoholic, our problem is internal. And what the Big Book says, and what the Wizard of Oz says at the end of all of it, it says, hey, guess what? What you're looking for is deep within you, but it's going to be the last place you look. And unfortunately, well-intentioned people that may not have had what we have, which is a reverse perspective on life called a perception problem, told us we've been looking for it in the wrong place. And the great reality is deep within. Isn't that amazing that when it's surrendered, it uses the words "and we agnostic"? If we were searching and fearless, it sounds like a fourth step, right? A searching and fearless inventory. I put down on paper what's breeding and growing and harboring inside of me. I get it out, and then I speak it into existence. And I ask that God, the great garbage remover, come and remove the garbage. And all of a sudden, I clear away the wreckage of my past, and I enter into the realm of the spirit, which had been here the whole time. I'm sure it's not a different place. It's not like I walked outside and I was in a new arena. It's a place of spirit. And whether or not they knew all this when this came out, this book is, as Nadia said, the long time sobriety there was the longest time, at least following his tenets. Apart from the Oxford group was Bill Wilson with 4.5 years. He got sober in December of 34. This came out in April of 39. He was the longest sober member of whatever the hell he was the member of at that time. The rest of us, if you study the history, which we're going to talk about, there was only 12 sober alcoholics at the end of 36 or the beginning of 37. So over the next year and a half that this came out, was the other 70 or whatever that they bumped it up and said there were 100. But there wasn't a lot of experience. Yet this book remains unchanged and still stands the test of time with guys who are sober 40 and 50 and 60 plus years, because the principles contained in this book are universal. They're perfect. They don't change because they don't need to. And sometimes I forget all that. You know, if you want the history of Cleveland is, I know I've been to many, I was at the first meeting, which broke away. And then the second meeting, and the first two meetings in Cleveland, the second one broke away a few months later because of a resentment in a coffee pot. Just like they said, the Orchard Grove group was AA group in Cleveland, #2, and the Borton group was the first meeting that left from, and it might have been from the name, Steve. I don't know if it was Borton or a different last name, which they didn't list in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. But it started at a house meeting, and then they found a place to stay. Now, if you go down to Akron, and we're humble in Cleveland, we let them think AA started down there at the Mayflower and Dr. Bob's house. King School is now deemed the oldest meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because it's met in the same place since that time. But the first official meeting took place when Clarence Snyder left away from the Oxford group. He told Dr. Bob, we're going to hold a meeting up in Cleveland and call it AA. And you understand, the Oxford group came up and tried to bust it up. They didn't want them to leave because there was some benefit to the Oxford group, which whoever it was, Frank Buckman or whatever, was he the starter of that movement there? And he didn't want the drunks to get away because they like telling us what God told them in the upper room to come down and tell the alcoholics. And guess what? The alcoholics said, we want to hear from God ourselves. And I share this with you guys because I come on this meeting. It's not to be written. But lately I'm wondering, because I still go to church and I profess a certain faith and belief. But it's been dawning on me lately. I'm going to church to find out someone else's concept of God. And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and you guys say, take the 12 steps and experience Him for yourself. Maybe this is the most current revelation of God's reaching out to man to say, guess what? If you're looking in the heavens, I may be there, but we'll deal with that later. Why don't you look at where I exist right now, which is deep within you? So I don't know if that helped you. It was filibustering. I filled up 10 minutes of time, Nadia, because she asked me to.
Thank you. You did a great job. Where do you put all of that? So what my dear darling brother Bill spoke about is this divine hand of God that has been at play to bring Alcoholics Anonymous to us, to bring a solution to his children. And we're gonna see some other divine little interventions. We're coming on to them shortly. With the appearance, we're at the bottom of page XVII, Roman numeral 17.
And hey, Nadia,
yeah.
You know, don't you love the words that they use here? I mean, this is not just by accident. The paragraph right above that says, by late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time. Now we wouldn't even let them make coffee at some of our home groups. Behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. There's a lot of expressions and tenets that talk about someone seeing a light. You know, you had a guy on a horse that saw a light. The new light came into the world 2,000 years before the guy that they talk about, that the guy on the horse was talking about. Bill Wilson said he saw something light up the room, and then something of wind, not of wind, or something blew through him, not of wind, but of spirit. And maybe that's what it is, enlightenment, awakenedness. Maybe it's a physical light, but they use powerful words in here. We just read this. Half the time we don't even read the forewords or the prefaces, right? Hell, who cares about Bill's story? Let's get into there's the solution, because it's all about me. And we miss a lot of the history. And I was thinking about it. I'll say this, you know, I get around Rob and Steve and those guys that study it. I like learning that but that may not be my forte. You know what I mean? I'm the kind of guy who wants to walk in and know everything they know, probably to benefit me, so people think I know what the hell I'm talking about. But I know what appeals to me. God gives me desires and I pursue them. I like talking about what I've experienced. And the one good thing that I have is to be in this area. I wasn't a total success if you're just counting abstinence from my first meeting. But there are probably some stories that I can share that have never been recorded in history books that I learned from members who went to meetings with Bill and Dr. Bob and watched Alcoholics Anonymous in Cleveland, Ohio, which is, we're going to find out, it blew up once they had some articles. And most people thought that AA started in Cleveland because of the aggregate of recovery. So, like I said, I'm tripping over my words because I'm being recorded and I know that I'm lying through my teeth, but I'm trying not to maliciously lie.
So let's just go look at that reference of because what we've said this before, that there are so many beautiful deep concepts, exactly what Bill's just said, but they are repeated throughout the book, repeated throughout the book. So I have this awesome app that I love on my phone, 164andmore.com, and let's go look at some other references regarding light, and we can just page references to this word, because I think that's really powerful. I love that because it made me think of one of the synonyms that Bill invites us when trying to get a God of our own understanding, and that is a Father of light. And that's over on page 14, the first paragraph. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Having a look here now. There's 2 wives. Oh, yeah, okay, that's just, should it happen again, regard it in a different light. There's some 12 and 12 stuff here. That's it. And then on page 73, interaction. He hopes they will never see the light of day. Those transgressions, right? So thanks for that. That was beautiful. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Now that little spark is starting to be fanned into a flame, and this flame is going to become a wildfire, and we're going to watch it now. We're going to watch it happen on the next page. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick. You know what I love about this guy? He's a rule breaker. I went and checked him out, okay? He was regarded by Martin Luther King Jr. as the greatest preacher of the century. But you know what? He was a detested man because he came up against all Christian readings and concepts and the way that they were translating the Bible in churches. So he was quite a rebel, but it says he was a noted clergyman. He was renowned, reviewed our first edition with approval. Here comes another little miracle. Here's another how the hand of God plays. And we see much more of it in Bill's story as well. In the fall, sorry, I just also want to note to you that Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick was a witch hunter, like somebody else we're going to read about now, Jack Alexander. He spent time busting out mediums who were fake. It was in the time of Harry Houdini. So he was a witch hunter. He wrote an article about it. Wrote an article about it, read our book, and he was like, this is amazing, gave us a thumbs up. Now we get another, sorry, I've just the word punt. Yes. You know, when you're punting a brand. So we got another punt, and this was very unintentional because Fulton Oosler, who was then editor at Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. Here's that hand fanning the flame. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. And today, from modem to modem, Zoom room to Zoom room, from WhatsApp group to WhatsApp group. I mean, it's just, it's just awesome. It's awesome, Ali. I agree, my brother. It's awesome. Yeah. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. In the spring of Nadia gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. So look at the top of the page, the fourth line. We've gone from 800 to 2,000. Like this wildfire is starting to take a hold.
Nadia,
Then, go for it.
Did you notice something here? So the book was published and released in April of 1939. I have a signed copy by Bill W. I don't take it out of the safe, Rob, so you can't prove that I don't. But listen, by the end of 1939, that's 8 months later, Nadia, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So what it's saying is from 76, how many was it really, Rob? You're allowed to chime in, I think. 76, 80, 84. Steve talked about it the other night. There's an estimated somewhere between the mid 70s up to 90, maybe. Let's give them the benefit. There weren't even 100. That was April of 39. Now, when Bill wrote that we are more than 100 have recovered, let's assume that he even wrote it before April of 39 when it hit the press. So even over the course of the next year, let's give him the whole year of 1939, it went from less than 100 to 800. That's a big increase. It was also said when we noticed in, just to pay attention, the membership when the third edition was printed in, the fourth edition was printed in 2001. It was estimated that the amount of alcoholics sober in recovery or in AA were 2 million. It's 23 years later, and the estimate still boasts the same number. There was a time, and I don't want to misstate it, when the recovery rate over the years was growing at a substantial amount, like over 100% a year, doubling after a while. And what happened is obviously people are dying off, but still people are coming up. It's not like alcoholism hasn't quit. I wonder if a lot of the fellowships that finally branched off because they said singleness of purpose we're going to respect, or we have our own identification problems because it's opened up a whole lot of other fellowships. But more importantly, because of the members, the number of people that are coming to AA while they're young or scarcely meet all the symptoms, like it says in here, right? Young people would be, mystified if you called them, take offense if you called them alcoholic, but get them to try and stop and they'll see that they have trouble doing so. Again, the bottle beats most of us into a state of reasonableness. And here's the reality of it. We're still not even meeting probably 90. How many alcoholics die before they ever get to their first AA meeting? So we get the top sprinkling of a percentage that suffer from, according to the third tradition membership, I'll include all who suffer from alcoholism, not just everyone who decides they want to give up drinking for Lent. That doesn't make you an AA member, although you meet the short third tradition, the short form. right? If you have a desire to stop drinking, you get to come into AA and vote. Unfortunately, they've changed it from that. But there's a lot of interesting things that the numbers haven't moved that dramatically in the last 23 years. This is just something to pay note to. We'll get to.
Nadia, you got to unmute.
Nadia.
Thank you. Thank you. Samantha, we see your hand, honey. Afterwards, we're going to do Q&A. Stick around. Then Jack Alexander. Here it is. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. So this is quite interesting. Jack Alexander came to scoff, okay? He also another witch hunter coming to find out, is this another scam? Is this a pyramid scheme? Whichever. And he had, he came to see that these were men with real solutions, real answers. And his article just absolutely, that was it. I think that was the fuel on the fire that we needed. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. Remember that first promise that we had in the forward to the first edition where it talks about mushrooming? That's a promise. We've seen it ourselves. We said it at our last one. We're in almost every country of the world. I think we're falling short of about 11 countries, and then we're in every country on our planet. AA had become a national institution. So this is 800 to 2,000 alcoholics recovered is made possible by the power of God and the power of one alcoholic working with another. That's
Now,
it.
did you notice the date of what Rob just so graciously put up there? Notice the date of the Alexander article. Oh, you're muted again.
Let me just take this off.
The date was March of 1941. We are in March of 2024. It was 83 years ago this month. That's another celebration. Rob, don't you agree? If dates are important, I mean, that's real important. That's significant. And I had this is one of the side notes, a friend of mine who I've known in AA for 30 years. When we went to her parents' 50th wedding anniversary, which was or 60th, I take that back because it was 15 or 17 years ago. They had a grandfather who owned a business in Chicago that it was alcoholic. And when news got out that the miracle for alcoholism took place, he sold his business and moved to Cleveland or Akron, Ohio. That's something you won't find in the book, but when they say that this, by sending it out in letter or book or whatnot. And then I was at a meeting today, and the people were talking about, it says in how it works if you have decided you want what we have. Sometimes we leave it up to the newcomer to know what the hell it is we have, and that might not be incumbent on us to do so, because not all of them are getting the books mailed. Some of them are being directed to AA, led to AA, guided to AA, whatever term you want to use, and they're arriving at the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't provide them with the book. We don't tell them what we have, and they go out and drink. We say they didn't want what we had. Why don't you tell them what you have? We've had deep and effective spiritual experiences. We've been relieved from the obsession to drink. A lot of times at a meeting, we fall asleep so much that it's good to see our friends. I mean, look at the faces. We all know each other here. I'm not assuming that someone snuck in that desperately needs to know what we have to offer in Alcoholics Anonymous. They go out and drink and we blame it on them rather than look at what message are we carrying in the fellowship. Yeah. Because not everyone's being mailed a book now. They got to come and we make them pay for it, because I'm too cheap to buy one for the new guy.
So when I said that he'd come to scoff, or Jack Alexander, let's go look at another reference at what he came to do and what actually happened. Jack Alexander came to scoff at AA, but he actually remained to pray, i.e., he worshipped, he sang our praises, right? So let's go look at where that makes reference to that again in the book on Roman numerals page XXXII. 32, Roman numerals page 32. It's at the end of the doctor's opinion. It's the last page, the last sentence. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. And though perhaps he came to scoff, Jack Alexander came to disprove us, he may remain to pray. Many come to these rooms saying, yeah, I don't know, I'm not like you. I'm not an alcoholic like you. I haven't done the things you've done yet. This book's not for me. I don't need to do these steps. We're praying that you will come to scoff and that you will remain to pray with us.
I had another thought when Rob posted up that picture of who was the steel baron? Rockefeller, right? And he said, won't money spoil this thing? Alcoholism is a chronic, progressive, fatal, if not treated illness. So it's chronic in that it occurs or over a long period of time is the meaning of the word chronic. It's progressive, which means we get worse, we never get better, and then it's fatal. And I'm wondering now, and it takes a while. I mean, some can become alcoholic immediately, and I understand that, but you're probably not going to make penitentiary decisions on your second drunk. That would be the exception to the rule. People were drinking themselves into depravity, insanity, and death over long periods of time. With this pandemic going on, or epidemic with fentanyl right now, I wonder if the concept wouldn't have been different if someone came to them and said, we need money to get the word out. They probably wouldn't have said money would spoil this thing, because you can get high one time and die from that stuff, right? I'm not trying to be divisive or avoid singleness of purpose, but in the 12 and 12, when it's talking about the traditions, it's an interesting thing that the very things that the high in the sky alcoholic mentality that will start hospitals and reform and education and will help dope addicts and these people with all these other problems and will reach into the prisons. Every one of the things that they dreamed about, but we had to stay with our singleness of purpose, have manifested as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. Look at all the 12-step programs. Look at the treatment centers that use the 12 steps as modality or recovery, sending all their clients to A&A, and then all the other fellowships that have stemmed, that have borrowed the 12 steps. They might not have been as delusional, or it might not be as comical as it is when we're reading the traditions now, when they wanted to start their little hospital with different floors and reach everyone in the world. Because like I said, this may be the new divine revelation, or the most current revelation of God's relation with us, that maybe he's not so far off as we think, either in time or in distance. He's right here. He's right now. He's deep within. And what's blocking us from the connection, people that are much better at explaining this talk about the transmitter being God. Is never broken. It's never off. It's always transmitting. What happens is our receiver is damaged, and AA helps us to repair or undamage the receiver that's been broken along the way because of our self-centeredness, our obstinacy, our resentment, our fear, our pride, all the things that block us from the spiritual principles that we live by today. Just something to take note of.
I'm going to echo you there, my brother, because step 11, Bill writes, sort through prayer and meditation on page 59. It spells out there. on page 59 of How It Works. It says here, it's exactly to echo what Bill's just said, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. I want to highlight the words conscious contact. What Bill is saying, we've always had contact. We've always been in contact. We've just not been conscious to it. We've been asleep. And we get to wake up. We get to wake each other up here. We get to have an awakening. And then we are conscious of that contact. You know, we read these steps, we just read them, and it's like Bill said, and that's why these book studies are just such a gift. Such a gift. I mean, for me, I love doing these because I get to sit and I get to flesh out the words. I get to look at the words, the meanings. This book was not written, it was written by a man, but it was written by a divine, it had to have been, guys, come on. What alcoholic will call himself self-will run riot? Huh? Where would we allow our pride to write that about ourselves? God had to have something to do with that. This book
And
was written for me, for you. Yeah, go for it.
what I need to be, what I remind myself of now, and it wasn't my idea, but it was brought to my attention. And what I try and remind others of is what you just talked about, page 59. The 12 steps as we see them laid out in the book and we read at the beginning of most of our open or closed meetings that we attend are not the steps. They are a description of the action taken. Because just what you read, sought through prayer and meditation, it's more than, I mean, I've got to continue with self-examination. Excuse me. And in the 12 and 12, there's a powerful, one of my favorite lines in there. And I'm starting to fall more in love with the 12 and 12 as I am the big book, but not for the same reason. Because the instructions are not in the 12 and 12. And there was a time when the fellowship got away from the program of recovery and we were really in trouble. You know, they were sending everyone to treatment and they were trying to take people through the steps out of the 12 and 12, which we forget were just essays and descriptions of the fellowship as Bill saw it. And ultimately, he wrote about the 12 steps because no alcoholic wanted to buy a book called The 12 Traditions alone. It seemed like corporate America, and they just were okay with running things the way they did. But these were a description of the action taken by the people who wrote the book. The instructions are neatly concealed in the book. But like I said, my favorite line in the 12 and 12 says there is a direct linkage between self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken independently, any one of those spiritual precepts or avenues are going to produce results. If I'm talking to God, maybe I'm leaving you alone. That's a good start. If I'm trying to listen to God, maybe my mind's slowing down. And if I'm continuing to look at myself and be truthful or honest with myself, I can see what changes need to be made. But it says if we take them collectively, interwovenly, they produce an unshakable foundation for life. And that is a powerful line. And this is very real. And most of us aren't willing to do the work. It says occasionally, some of us, and maybe all of us, maybe some of us, so in case it didn't happen, no big deal. Some of us will eventually be granted a glimpse of the ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom. Could you imagine God showing you a kingdom of the realm that he lives in every day and see things with no time, no space, no distance, no separation, but in the unadulterated, pure love of now? If you got a glimpse of that, you would never want to leave there. I remember something happened as a result of finally following the actions laid out in the book, that I was granted a glimpse of something. I won't describe it because if I describe it, it wouldn't have been what I thought it was. But it was almost like all my fears had fallen. And I said, I can't wait. I was not afraid of my mom dying anymore, me dying, what was going to happen to my nieces and nephews, anything that was beyond my control. that I would define as a tragedy only by making that judgment, which means I'm playing God. And I remember saying, I can't wait to see you face to face. And I thought, you know what? If you want to take me now, I'm ready to go. What's stopping us? But the reality is that I guess I'm still supposed to do something in this realm while I'm here. But the point being is that's a description. Praying only for knowledge. Our 11-step instructions doesn't say to pray only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry it out. It asks us to recognize the intuition, the inspiration, to be aware of it. If something's going on internally where I'm unsettled, to just be still and know that he is God, right? Pause. There's certain instructions. And what happens is you get a lot of people who don't want to read into the instructions. And what they do is they state the description of the action that's listed on the wall, which is not the step at all. But a description, like I said, I don't want to belabor the point, but I really have to be reminded that our first step is not, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, although it says that. Go to an Al-Anon meeting and guess what their first step is? It's identical to ours. But in chapter 3, it says the first step in recovery is when I fully concede that I had to learn. We learned, so I need information, that we had to fully concede, capitulate, surrender to the fact that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And I'll really go out on a limb. I don't necessarily believe that the steps, although they're written chronologically, methodically, and in a certain order in this book, that they're all experienced or taken in the exact chronological order that they're laid out in the book. I was really thinking about this. The pertinent idea, C, that God could and would if he were sought. Rob, I don't know if I was convinced of that at that point, and it always stopped me from moving on. I believe that if I'm willing to be convinced, then I can move on and find out if I was right or not. Step 2, the manifestation of step 2 does not take place till the 10th step. For me to say I come to believe now I'm restored to sanity, I'm deceiving myself. I haven't done what's necessary for the restoration to take place. I sat in meetings for years and they said, don't leave before the miracle happens. I thought it happened on Sunday, but by Thursday I was so angst up, I picked up a drink on Friday and drank right through the miracle. The only time it would happen on Sunday is if I'm at the 10th step on a Sunday. It doesn't happen on a certain day or a certain time. It happens if I take the spiritual action and follow the instructions. A lot of times we mislead in the fellowship, and I don't think we mean to. We just take a concept, we don't dig into it, and we parrot stuff or repeat stuff, and it can actually be fatal for some of us, especially the real alcoholics.
Thanks, Bill. I think there's 2 things here that we have to remember is that those first 100 didn't have this book. They didn't have this book. They had other books open up on their table when they were having these amazing experiences, and they were doing a lot of action. They were sitting in hospital beds. They were homing alcoholics, feeding them, hanging out with the Al-Anons. The families were involved. There was a lot of action. These guys were pounding streets, helping each other. And like I said, they were not sponsoring each other out of this book, just something to think about. And then there's something else I want to say to you. You were saying how you lost fear of your mom dying or your nieces or your nephews or even you, like you're looking forward to it. I hear promises. Let's go find them. Page 63. 3rd step promises. That's what you're talking about, my brother. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Not perfectly for us perfectionists, you perfectionists, me perfectionists. I'm in a room full of them, sure. Just well, not perfectly. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves. Here we are, helping each other. Our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, because alcohol seriously gave me power. Drugs and alcohol gave me lots of power. But now I'm feeling a new power flow in. As we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, your experience, Bill, something happened. Something happens often. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And on that note, those beautiful promises that you just shared, because that's the deal. That's the deal here. We do the actions, the promises come. And if you're an alky or an addict like me, you want to know, like, what's the deal? Like, what's in it for me, right? What if I have to do this stuff? What am I going to get? What am I going to get? And we'll come to scoff. But my prayer today is that we'll remain here to pray. Thank you, guys.
You know, when
Thanks
you
for being with
mentioned
us.
about, when you mentioned real quick before we go, just bring this to one thing I want to say. You mentioned Fulton Osler, right? You said he was a whoever coined him as the greatest preacher of all time. He was a Baptist. And I've been to some Baptists and I've been to some Southern Baptists, which makes the Baptists look like, you know, I mean, you sneeze and you're going to hell. There was something else. You said it right. We begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. It may mean hereafter from this moment forward, but I always read it meaning the hereafter, the thing that I was afraid to, where I was going to go at the end, right? When I found out that I had let God down. But notice one more thing, right after it said that statement in the 11th step in the 12 and 12, listen to this statement, and you must wonder who's really giving the message. And we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure for so long as we try, however falteringly. In other words, no matter what mistakes we make, we will be confident to find and do the will of our own Creator. They're telling us we can have heaven here right now and we don't need to worry about the hereafter anymore. We're going to be secure. That's a big change for the message that's been being passed out, at least in the country I live in, for 200 years, because they were founded on Christian principles. And I think one of the things to keep people in their corral, to keep them fear-induced rather than liberated, is to say, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. And if you do this, for sure you are. Why would I want them to seek God out of fear? Wouldn't it be more attractive to seek him because he's worthy to be sought, and to seek him because I love him back because he loved me first, rather than saying, well, if I don't believe in God or find God or accept his son or whatever it is, he's going to send me somewhere that I don't want to go. That would almost be some type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Extortion, if you will, or a myriad of that. You know what I'm saying? You must do this or else. That's an ultimatum. Wouldn't you rather be drawn to something that's unparalleled love because of the nature of love, rather than be blinded and driven by self? All right, we didn't get any facts today, Steve, but we got a whole lot of bullshit. You better turn off the recording.